Welcome everyone and to this amazing session about Next Frontier of HIV Activism. I am your host today, Kiro. My pronouns are they, them. I work at Action Positive as the programs coordinator and interventions as well. Alors, mon nom c'est Kiro. Mes pronoms sont Yel et Lo. Je travaille avec Action Positive. Je suis content d'être ici aujourd'hui. And my moderator today is Jordan. Jordan?
Hey everybody, I'm Jordan Bongor from the GMSH. My pronouns are they, them, and I can't speak French, so you're not going to get anything in French out of me today. But I'll be your moderator today. I'm monitoring your questions in the text chat. So.
Thank you, Jordan. Today, we are very excited to be I'm excited to be hosting today, and Jordan is excited to be moderating this topic in particular, as both of us are big activists, but we're even more excited to hear from an amazing group of panelists that have been doing such incredible work and have had such a huge impact in the HIV community. So we're really looking forward to hear from them. But before we do that, we're going to start off by doing a land acknowledgement, of course.
Great, thanks, Kiro. So with gratitude and respect on behalf of the GMSH, we wish to acknowledge that we are in the traditional territory of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat. This land has been home to Indigenous cultures for the past 15,000 years. The territory is subject to Treaty 13, signed in 1805, and the Toronto Purchase. Today, many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island call this place home, as do we, settler and his guests. We express our gratitude to live and work in this territory. And just to take a moment to identify where I am situated in terms of my relationship with the land, I'm a settler of European descent, an uninvited guest on Turtle Island, and I just want to acknowledge that the gratitude I have to be here with everybody today on these lands and doing this work.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Today, I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. First, we have Alphonso King Jr. Alphonso, how are you? And welcome. And tell us what I want to know from all the panelists, actually. I want to know what brought you onto this conversation today? What kind of HIV activism have you been doing? And why this topic of conversation in particular has a lot of meaning for you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Alphonso King Jr., but I'm probably better known to the community as Jade Elektra, which is my drag persona, or DJ Relentless. I have been HIV positive since 1989. I kind of got into my activism, really, I grew into it because I wasn't out at first, but I just wanted to start it to help. And what I do now these days, since COVID started, I'm doing more speaking engagements, but I produce a monthly magazine called POZ-PLANET. My husband and I run POZ-PLANET, the Facebook group. I also produce the POZ-TO Awards, where we honor 10 people each year for their activism or fundraising abilities for HIV/AIDS. I guess that's all that I should say right now, so we can give other people more time.
So thank you so much, Alphonso. Always love working alongside with you. You've been such an inspiration to me in so many ways. And speaking of POZ-TO Awards, I was one of the first recipients when you had your first one. It was the first one, yeah, for Middle Eastern Nights. So happy that you're here with us. Next, we have David Sumeri.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon.
Good afternoon, David.
So before I start, I just want to acknowledge that I've been an activist since the 1980s. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and I come in here with a sense of heaviness because we lost a trans HIV activist yesterday back home. So that's a lot sense of grief that I'm bringing in, and I want to name her. I want to call Brandy Rodriguez as somebody who I honor and recognize and celebrate her life as being an openly trans woman in a country that's very transphobic and very homophobic. Who engaged with sex workers on the streets late at night or through 2 o'clock in the morning, making sure they had condoms, making sure they had lubes. She organized with stakeholders to ensure they got tested. She even worked with migrant sex workers to ensure that they also had access to healthcare. She would walk into FBA and say, I need this, and she would get it. She was always a very visible and vocal presence in the room. And so I really wanted to start my presentation today by honoring her and her legacy of work. And to recognize that her, and like so many others in my home country, who have really travailed and shown a level of resilience and courage, activism. That's not book activism, it's street activism. It's grassroots activism. And their activism efforts are what inspired me to be the activist I am today. So I moved here 5 years ago, having come in from a country and having run a national HIV/AIDS agency, support agency for people with HIV, as an openly gay HIV positive man as well. And that of course had its fair share of struggles. I'm now involved in the community here. And so I'm going to leave it there for now. Yeah, thank you, Kira.
Thank you so much, David. Next, we have Jermaine Hall. Jermaine.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jermaine, as Kira said. My pronouns are tentatively he, him. I have a very complex relationship with identifying as an activist because it's almost been assimilated into this like formal thing. And sometimes I feel like without the, certain titles attached, that I don't feel like I'm doing activism work. But today I'm acknowledging the fact that as a young Black gay man who came to Toronto as a refugee, who found out I was HIV positive during the refugee process, that simply by showing up today, my presence here is a part of the activism work. And I'm honored to share space with everyone and be a part of this conversation.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jermaine. We're very excited to once again to have all three of you with us today to share with us in this discussion on what HIV activism, the next frontier, is going to look like and so on. But before I do that, I just want to remind everyone that you will have the chance to ask your questions. Please put them in the chat and Jordan will be moderating them and making sure that they are asked based on time as well. So, but if you do have a direct question for some of the panelists, you're also welcome to message them directly if you want to. But if it's something that's going to be helpful for everyone, we definitely encourage you to ask it and share the question with everyone. So, panelists, are you ready for your questions? It's not for each question, right? You get 400 points. No, I'm just kidding. So, all right. So the first question that we have is, how has the pandemic, let's address the elephant in the room here, COVID-19. How has the pandemic affected your activism? Who wants to go first? Popcorn style.
I guess I will. For the past decade, my husband and I have produced events for the HIV positive community here in Toronto. They've been rebranded several times. So it was the POZ-TO events. It's been called, we had a party called Daddy Issues, and then we later changed it to Mingle. We use the events not only for social, as a social gathering, but also as a way to fundraise for local AIDS organizations. And it was a good way, a good reason to get people out and talk, mingle, understand what services were being offered, those kind of things. COVID came along and shut down all of that for me. So we have not been able to do those events. And I kind of feel lost because I had gotten very used to, these were monthly events. So every month I was working with a different organization and I was getting to, socialize with other people in the community and just, check on people and friends and see how they were doing and networking. And I just felt that was really, really important. So it's really put a damper on that part of what we were doing. But in another way, it's kind of opened the door for me to speak more via Zoom or our POZ-TO awards, we had to move those to virtual. So while I love having everyone in the same room and honoring people in person, you know, it's better than nothing. So we've been doing it online, and actually the next one is coming up on December 1st for World AIDS Day. And I'm in the process of putting that together right now. So, but that's what happened to me when COVID came along.
Excellent. So would you say that your transition from in-person to virtual activism has impacted your work in a positive way, or it's a balance, or?
I would say that having to go virtual has streamlined what it is that we do with the awards. But I don't know, it's hindered a lot of what, like my husband, normally at our events, my husband would produce like 3 pieces of art that we would auction off to help whatever organization. We haven't really been able to do that. I mean, I guess we could do it online, but like, it's not the same having me hosting and pushing the artwork during the event, that kind of stuff. It's made it a little different and difficult to fundraise, but raising awareness, it's still, you know, it's streamlined online.
Okay, thank you so much, Alphonso. Who wants to go next?
At the time of the pandemic, when the pandemic started, I was not working. So when the pandemic happened, it further increased my feelings of isolated and being disconnected from the community. But what it did is was it forced me to evaluate my work in the community. And it forced me to evaluate where I wanted to go, and was I doing what I really wanted to do in terms of my activism. It really made me pause and reflect. And that kind of made me now think about those marginalized groups of folks who were not being reached, who've not been traditionally been accessed. So I found myself working with people with disabilities, with both physical and mental disabilities, supporting them in their work. Looking at migrant populations with HIV who are not accessing healthcare services. So I found myself being able to do that kind of work. For me, that was not the work that you see being heralded or praised or widely acknowledged, but it's work that I feel that honestly needs to get done. And so it forced my commitment to really look at those areas. On the other hand, one of the things that came up for me was, how do we support people who do the work? I've lost advocates both home in Trinidad and Tobago and here during this pandemic. And there was no ability to come together to collectively grieve over the loss. And it really posed the question, even with the loss of Brandy yesterday, I was having this conversation with someone this morning, but how do we actually support each other in a time of crisis? And sometimes as advocates, we are afraid to reach out and say that we need help, because we're seen as being a strong arm for other folks. So we're afraid to be vulnerable. How do we reach out? And what does that intentionally look like? So there's some of the questions that I'm raising now because of the pandemic.
That's wonderful, David, and very good points that you mentioned there. Jermaine.
My activism during the pandemic has kind of been like the pandemic itself, or it's been in waves. So there have been moments when I felt really brave and felt like I was like super activist. And then there were moments when I was like feeling really low and feeling like I'm not doing enough. But as to David's point is that whilst I consider myself an activist, I'm also a human being. And I've had to reconcile the fact that I will not feel my strongest, and I will not feel my bravest at all times to do the work, because I feel like sometimes people forget that activism is work, to do the work of activism. And so I guess unfortunate, I don't know if that's the word I'm looking for. My take on this has been very selfish in that throughout the pandemic, the majority of it has been me being an activist for myself. So in times when I felt like my mental health was being really impacted. Instead of like sulking at the fact that I'm not saving the world, I decided to save myself. So that has been my activism during the pandemic.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, and that's powerful. That's powerful what you just said. I mean, I've seen what a lot of folks who are activists during the pandemic, how they've been affected. A lot of them, because they couldn't do it in person anymore, and also not necessarily having access to technology to be able to go online, was not good. It was not good for a lot of folks. So this is a very powerful tool to be an activist for yourself, to relearn that. And that means learning self-care tools, setting boundaries for yourself so you don't burn out. So when you're back in the game, you're able to really tackle on the activism in a more powerful and more meaningful way. So thank you for that.
Carol, not to take up too much time, but I really wanted to drive home the point that, as David was saying, if you're like a marginalized, if you're like living with HIV, but also a refugee, if you're somebody who is Black or Indigenous, you kind of went through like hyper isolation when everyone went into isolation. It was much more intense if you have your family back home and don't have that level of support here, you know. So I really had to name that hyper isolation that people are going through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you for naming that. Now, what is your advice to someone who wants to start being an activist? A lot of people wonder, like, I want to be an activist. Where could they start?
I would say start with yourself. If you want to be an activist, start with yourself, because I'm sure for most people who become activists, it feels like a calling, because you're going through something personally that requires you to fight for yourself, right? So acknowledge the need for that fight for others, but also the need to fight for yourself. Because I became an activist because of the debilitating circumstances in Jamaica around being gay. And it's intricately tied to being HIV positive. And so I could either let the Jamaican society crush me even further, or I would stand up for myself. So start with yourself.
Thank you for that, Jermaine. I mean, I want to elaborate more on the question as well, because a lot of folks, and I'm hoping all of you could add on to this, think that you need some financial backing or funding to create a meaningful impact when it comes to activism. And like, do you agree to this? To what extent do you agree to this? Alphonso, go ahead.
First, I would like to say I kind of stumbled into being an activist only because of what happened with me. Was I wasn't really out about being HIV positive, but I had a couple of friends who were. So we started advocating for each other, as far as we were looking out for each other. And in the process of doing that, then it started, our circle expanded with other people, like, oh, well, you know, let's check on so-and-so, let's do this, let's get together, let's do that. So it started small like that. And then the more I started doing stuff with my friends, and the more I realized there weren't social aspects for HIV positive people. So that's why I started worrying about, do we have spaces for us to come together and socialize? And are they safe spaces where, you know, you don't have to worry about the stigma of it, just come and be yourself, meet people. And that was really kind of what I brought with me when I came to Canada. I was living in New York before I got here. And I really looked around, and there was a group that was here, but they weren't out about being positive. And that kind of bothered me. So that was the reason that POZ-TO started, was I wanted a group that was out and to stand up against the stigma. If we're meeting in secret, that's not going to help change anything. So that was the reason that I sort of started, and POZ-TO just kind of grew from there into the awards and into the magazine and all of those other things. So start small is what I would tell someone. Start with, helping one other person who's HIV positive. That's where you can start. And it'll, you'll know from that how far you can go, what else you can do. You'll figure out what it is that you can do.
Yeah. Just to add, for me, I think it has to come from a place of personal conviction. Why do you want to do this? And why is this important to you? A lot of activism we see today is very glamorized. It's very social media. I'm an activist. I'm doing this. I'm traveling the world. I'm going to this conference. I'm speaking at this event. That's not what activism really is. At the heart of it is what is driving you to do this. For me, it was coming from a place of recognizing. So part of my history is that I worked in advertising before I got into activism. I was so interesting that every advertising agency I worked with, there was an HIV/AIDS campaign. And I was writing for that campaign. And while writing for the campaign, I recognized that the one thing that was needed to change the dynamic was that we needed people out there who were living with HIV. We didn't want shadows, or we didn't want a hand of somebody or somebody who looked ill. We wanted a healthy face. And I became that from that conviction. And I started small. I didn't have resources. I didn't have financial backing. I just did a presentation at a Toastmasters club. And that evolved into something. And that evolved into something else. And that's how I ended up coming down the road of being where I am today. But it came from that place of personal conviction. I wanted to change the face of what living with HIV looks like in Trinidad and Tobago. I wanted to challenge that. And that's the reason why I put myself out there. I started small and ended up big. When I did my first media press interview, the reporter asked me, do I want to show my face? And I said, yes, because I do not want to feed into the idea of stigma anymore. I can't say I'm challenging stigma and that I'm hiding behind a mask or a shadow. So I was a very public face to HIV, but I came from a place of personal conviction. So the question I have to advocate to those who want to advocate is like, why do you want to do this? And what is your idea of activism? Is it that you see yourself being on media or on the street parading with flags or what have you? That's not the real heart of activism. It's about wanting to change hearts and minds. And that was it for me.
Thank you so much, David. I mean, you all had some incredible points here in terms of, starting small, starting with something that's meaningful to you, right? And that's very important. So it's kind of figuring out what is that? Like you were saying, David, there are a couple of questions you want to ask yourself. Why is this meaningful to you? Why is this something that you want to have an impact and affect change with it? Yes, Alphonso.
Oh, I to speak to the point of no funding. Every single thing that I've done here in Toronto has not been funded by, literally, I've knocked on doors and I've asked people to contribute, but to get them started, I did them myself. I literally I found I took a little bit of money of my own and started because I just feel like if I hadn't, they wouldn't exist. Like no one else was doing it at the moment. And I saw a need for that space. So, you can do it bare minimum, and you'll be surprised who will step up and help once they realize what it is that you're trying to do.
That's great advice, Alphonso. Yes, Jermaine.
I wanted to be very intentional in, ensuring that people understand that creating space and creating community is also activism. There was a point where I thought that activism simply meant that I was on television shows or I was being loud and out and proud and, doing things that would get me in a newspaper, blah, 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 blah. But there were points in my life where the only thing that I needed was support and to find a community that I thought I was missing. And if you can be the person who creates community for a fractured segment of people living with HIV, that in itself is really powerful activism. And together you all can grow in your activism.
Yeah, And I very much agree with you. One thing that I've learned, and it was talking with Indigenous folks on my show, The Queer Bunch, was they said, if you want to start being an activism and support a cause, don't try reinventing the wheel. Find out what's already out there, do your research, and join that cause to start being an activism that way. You don't have to march down the streets and start banging on doors or anything like that. You could start just by volunteering, finding out how you could assist or support them in any way, shape, or form. This is a form of activism, and everyone attending here, really, we're all a form of activists, and we're all doing this because it has an impact. So it could be career-wise, it could be volunteering, it could be peer engagement, it could be, there's so many forms, creating spaces that, like you were all saying, the opportunities are limitless. But if you don't know where to start, but there's a cause that's specific to you, find out what's already out there and start there, and see how you could add on, as opposed to trying to reinvent the wheel. Because the last thing you want is try to make it look like you're an activist for yourself, where you're trying to put yourself on a pedestal, because then this goes against the cause, right? So
For me, I think I've been inspired and encouraged by a very grassroots level of activism. Again, for me, activism is Brandy going out at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, fully dressed as a woman when she's biologically a man, but she dresses and identifies as a full woman. Going out at 2, 3 a.m. in the morning in the back streets, giving out condoms to sex workers. That is activism.
Yeah.
Activism is when a transgender woman in Trinidad and Tobago goes and performs in a public space, lip syncs for her likes, and wins the competition until the end, and people realize that really, this is a man dressed as a woman. And those are the things that, for me, is what activism is when you start to push the envelope, when you push into the mainstream, and you're not afraid to be yourself. Activism is Godfrey Seeley, who opened his house to take in gay men who did not have a place to go. His house in the street in Port of Spain became that refuge for a lot of gay men who were put out of their homes because once their sexuality was found out. His yard became a place that sex workers ran to when the police were chasing them down on the streets. So that, for me, is activism. And sometimes you tend to academize, or it's not the proper word, you know what I mean? We try to make it this very academic or glamorous thing. It's really how everyday folks in their own lives have managed to always press against the standards of what society is said is supposed to be acceptable.
Yeah,
and for me, that is die-hard activism.
I agree with that statement. All of you have really amazing different point of views of taking a look at activism, and that's why you're here, because you're just so awesome, all three of you. Dane, I just want to let you know, I saw your question. We're going to raise it up at the end, so we're going to take a look at that. So, you know, as activists, we do give a lot of ourselves in the work that we do very often. And sometimes that means putting ourselves and loved ones at risk of HIV stigma. And so how would you balance that risk associated with HIV activism and the rewards?
This question is very dear to my heart because it is something that informs what I do. The first time I experienced serophobia or HIV stigma was when I was 13. I had very little knowledge of HIV, and someone stigmatized me and my sister because there was a rumor that my mother had HIV because someone she had dated long ago died from HIV. So like this associated stigma just like affected both me and my sister and my mother, even before I knew much about it. And it's like, and that stuck with me. Like the person pretty much attacked us. There was a violent attack, and that informs when you've been subjected to that level of violence, it informs how you do things. And I wrote a piece the other day about, you know, the intersection of being Black and HIV positive. And I wanted to put my name on it and ultimately decided that just putting my first name on it was enough. There are moments when I felt like, you know, I wasn't brave enough, and, you know, I feel bad about that. But there are moments that I celebrate the fact that I even wrote the piece. But at the heart of it, at the heart of my, I guess, resistance to, you know, putting my face on the piece and being a more, I guess, out there activist is the constant worry that somebody might again, you know, attack my family back in Jamaica. And so it always is this, like, for me, this tug of war on how visible I want to be. And whilst I would love to be as visible as possible, I have to think about how other people might be affected by this. It's a very terrible place to be in, but it's a reality that we cannot pretend doesn't happen or isn't there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Jermaine. Who wants to go next?
I
David,
was forced to think about it in the sense that because I was very public and out and positive in my country, I was doing, you know, it came to a point where I was doing media almost every week. On World AIDS Day was the day that, like, everybody suddenly wants to do an interview about HIV. But I had to think about how the people in my circle were being affected. So if you go to a bar or public space, my friends and people who were seen with me were guilty by association. How it impacted my own romantic intimate relationships as well too, because the minute I have a partner, I'm with someone, by virtue of them being seen with me, their status will come into question. And so those are the things I had to dodge and maneuver and work around, and really had to have a really strong community around me who were not afraid to say, yes, David is my friend, David is my lover, and yes, he's HIV positive, and I know, and we take care of ourselves, and we take care of him, and we support him no matter what. And to have that kind of courage to do that, to say that, for me, meant a lot to me. It really meant that you were in my corner, that you were able to stand up in public and say, you know what, David is my friend. I don't care what, I would stand next to him. I know that he's gay. I know that he's HIV positive. I know this is all, I know all about him, but he's still my friend.
Yeah.
And for me, I respected that. And it's something that I hold very dear now. Because I had to recognize it took a lot of strength to do that.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciated that as well.
Thank you for sharing that, David. And yeah, like having that surrounding of people that will stand up and say, yeah, we know they're HIV, you're HIV positive, or so on. And you know, like I remember my experience with my ex-partner. When people used to see us together, they'd be like, oh, it must be positive too. And his response was like, so what if I was though? Right? Like, where are you trying to get with that? And it just made that, it stumped them very much, very often. Alphonso.
Well, probably because I'm the oldest out of the three panelists. I come from a little bit of a different background with HIV. When I got diagnosed in 90, I became positive in 89. But when I got diagnosed in 90, it was a death sentence. And so it was kind of scary. It was more so scary to tell people because of they automatically were afraid of you. They automatically were thinking you're going to die. You're going, you know, if I touch you, if I do anything, I'm going to die because of it. So I wasn't very out about my status. But the interesting thing that something that COVID brought about, a conversation with a relative of mine, put in perspective where I was when I became HIV positive and what my world was like with my parents. All this time until last year, I thought my mom had died of a heart attack. My mom died of HIV in 1988. My father died of HIV in 2005. I have nephews who are HIV positive now. So we are speaking about 3 generations of HIV and AIDS in our family. I say all of that to get to the point of I wasn't hiding because of I thought it was going to affect my family or friends or whatever. My closest friends, I was out about my status because if something happened to me, I wanted them to know what happened to me. But I was more so afraid for myself of losing work or not being able to find work because of people would know. And weirdly enough, a movie changed my life, and that movie was Paris is Burning. And I saw it and I was like, I need to go someplace when you, Jermaine, when you spoke of community, I need to go someplace where I felt like I had a community. I'm originally from Tampa, Florida. I didn't have that kind of a community there. But I went to New York and immediately stepped right into what was left of the cast of Paris is Burning and was adopted into the house of La Beja. Paris Dupree was my upstairs neighbor. Dorian Corey made my first drag outfits in New York City. So I immediately stepped into this community, and there was HIV, there was all kinds of stuff going on. And they taught me what I needed to know to survive. So I was very, very fortunate that I actually had the nerve to get up and leave Florida to go to New York to try to be a part of something else bigger than what I knew back in Florida. So I just wanted to kind of put that in perspective of that's a different route to getting to where I am right now. I totally understand, I shouldn't say I totally understand because I'm not Caribbean and I'm not from one of those islands, and I've never had that kind of pressure put on me. But my journey has been where I've actually sort of had a little bit of a privilege because of New York to step out and be who I wanted to be and who I am. So that's it.
Thank you for mentioning that, especially recognizing your privilege as an activist is very powerful to find out where other people don't have privilege, that kind of privilege to be able to make change there as well, effective change. So thank you for sharing that, Alphonso. My mind is blown by some of the things you just shared. I did not know about you, and it's awesome to know. Now, being an activist means burnout. Right, we know about activism burnout. So what are some of the things you do for self-care while you're doing activist work so you don't get to that burnout point?
Well, I'll go first.
Sure.
My love is music, and I'm a DJ. So I'm constantly mixing and doing stuff with music, creating things. I'm also a recording artist, so I sing. So those are music has always been my refuge as far as like when I need to escape or make myself feel better. I can always do that through music. So that's my main thing. Other than sitting and vegging in front of the television, that's about it.
Thanks, Alphonso. Jermaine, David.
This question feels very difficult because I've been finding that a lot of the things since the pandemic happened, and I don't know if anybody else is going through this, a lot of the things that brought me joy, the joy out of some of that is diminishing as well. And I've been trying to look for new things to, feed my soul. So for me, self-care is a constant, something that I'm constantly searching for, like different techniques. So it's a bit difficult. In the past, I really found joy out of very small things. I do my yoga, and I drink my traditional teas.
That's thanks for bringing that up, Jermaine. And it's and that happens. It's a very important thing to hold yourself accountable for when it comes to saying this does not bring me joy anymore, right? How can I find joy in that again, or so on, or find something else? So it's a journey of self-discovery as you grow with your activism in so many ways to find out different self-care techniques that you would apply. David.
So self-care is something I'm still learning. For a while, I had to uncondition myself from thinking that taking care of myself is being selfish. That's something I had to unlearn, and I'm unlearning. Recently, I do my love for drag, my drag character, Aldika. It's actually now my therapy. So sitting with drag is my therapy, because for me, that's my self-care. When people ask, where does all this emotion come from when you're on stage? It's like, I feel like a lot of the time, it's a lot of the stuff that I'm dealing with, I express through my art of drag, and through my performance now. So for me, drag is, I guess, performing in drag, I guess, is my self-care.
Yeah,
and
that's wonderful. I mean, there's 3 drag queens here: me, you, and Alphonso. Jermaine, do you want to join?
Right.
this girl group.
The Spice Girls.
Yeah. So no, but this is wonderful. I mean, one of the things that I find important with self-care is learning how to set boundaries for yourself with your activism, because we forget that is part of our self-care routine, to be able to set boundaries. For instance, when you need to disconnect, and being able to tell people, I'm sorry, I'm just not available for you right now. I need to kind of replenish myself. Or one of the things that I always tell a lot of my fellow activists that are feeling the burnout, or young activists in particular that are just starting up, it's like, if you're going to go for a walk and you bump into friends, don't even talk about your activism work. Learn how to really fully disconnect and be able to come back with it, as opposed to consuming everything, including your social life, right? So this is about learning how to balancing that out as an important part of self-care as well. Now, we have a few questions. We have 5 minutes for the last question before we go to questions from the audience. So what do you think is missing in today's activism? What's the gap do you think is missing?
I think that people, folks don't recognize the history of activism, particularly in HIV context, particularly in the gay liberation movement context. A lot of this generations take it for granted what went into where we are now, because where we are now did not come very easy. Whether you're from the Caribbean, whether you're from Toronto, whatever country you come from, we're able to stand where we are now and sit where we are now because of the work that our ancestors put in for us. And when I say ancestors, I mean our gay ancestors, our HIV ancestors. That where we can sit now is a result of that work. And I think that's what people don't recognize. And we take it for granted that we were always going to have this freedom to be ourselves and to accept ourselves and to be who we are, but not recognizing that we still have to struggle. There's still homophobia, there's still transphobia, there's still HIV phobia. We still live in a world that has injustices, and we are comfortable with the fact that that we don't have to fight anymore. And I get that too. I get that in a sense where we fought before because there was an urgency. People in our community would die. We fought for HIV treatment and HIV access because we were losing friends and families and loved ones. We fought for LGBTQ rights and activism because, again, of our friends, our families, even ourselves were facing discrimination. But because it's not as bad as it was before, we've taken it for granted, we become complacent. But I feel that there's still a struggle. We still have to fight for those who are left behind. There are still groups who are still not counted. There's still groups who are marginalized. There's still groups who need support. There's still groups who need care. And we have to remember that and never forget those groups and those communities.
Thank you, David. Who wants to go next? What do you think is missing from activism?
I would have to say I agree with everything that David just said. But the thing that I think is missing is the message that HIV/AIDS is not over. The way that it's marketed, the way, you know, it's fantastic about PrEP and U equals U and all of those things, but it's not over. So don't, you know, people are, the reason they're complacent is because they're looking at, oh, you take a pill and you're fine. Or, you know, you take a pill, you won't get it. If you're undetectable, you can't give it. It does not mean that it's done and that it's over. And that's part of the biggest problem. And I think the other part of what's missing is intergenerational
conversations.
Yeah, like the best example is a tribe. The elders teach the younger people how to maneuver, hunt, how to cook, all of those things. That's not happening anymore. Now people look at a YouTube video and they think they got it and they move on, when it doesn't really work that way. It doesn't work that way in most things. Experience has always been the best teacher. So if you know someone who does something, I learned how to be a DJ from a DJ who started back in the 70s. I was very grateful for him sitting down and talking with me and sharing his knowledge. We need to be doing that on almost everything, from activism, like HIV and AIDS activism, to just in general, our gay culture. All of these things are being lost because we're not passing them down, and the younger people are not trying to find out. When they do, it's just a footnote as opposed to actually speaking to someone who was there. So those are the
sorry, Alphonso, great point. I mean, intergenerational conversations, it comes up so often in this group and other conversations, seminars and so on. So, and we're still not doing it. Like, let's do it. Enough talking about it. Let's do it. Right. So yeah. Thanks for that, Alphonso. Jermaine.
I think what's missing from activism for me is, I guess, a reimagining of a true reimagining of what activism looks like. I think my experience in Canada and even back in Jamaica, activism was so tied, or activism around HIV so heavily tied in with public health and public health initiatives, that a lot of the times the people who are the most visible activists end up being like an arm of the government, and I'm left wondering, how do we move away from people just being data for the government to use and get a sense of where people living with HIV are and who they're not infecting and who they are infecting, to something that's more human and, you know, looks at all the different needs that people living with HIV have. Coming out of this pandemic, I think there will need to be a reckoning about, well, how do we support people economically? You know, we can give them PrEP and we can do all the teachings around how to prevent HIV, but without community support, without, you know, them being able to properly fulfill their economic needs, I sense that, you know, people are going to do harmful things to themselves. And so it really, I think there just needs to be like a good sit down and plan for the future past this pandemic about what people living with HIV will need, or the types of support that they will need.
Yeah, excellent. Yes, Alphonso.
One of the things that I, to your point, Jermaine, about reimagining, the reason that I started POZ-PLANET magazine was because of most of the magazines that I've read or that I see that are on newsstands or whatever, they're tied to pharmaceutical companies. I've made sure that our magazine has no ties to any pharmaceutical magazine. So we have the freedom of speech to talk openly about what our needs are. What, you know, if you're having problems with a med, I want to hear about it. if you're, you know, whatever is going on in your part of the world, and we have interviewed people from all over the world, you know, I want to hear about it because I want everyone to be on the same page. So when that reimagining happens, we have something to look at to talk about, okay, this is where we start, or this is what we need to do. So I just wanted to stick that in there.
And thank you so much for that, Alphonso. And thank you, panelists, for answering these questions and having this amazing discussion. Jordan, we have questions that need to be asked. Go for it for the panelists.
I'm going to take myself off mute here. So we have a few that were already touched on by the panelists just now. So I'm going to start with one actually that Alphonso touched on, which is how important has intergenerational mentorship been for each of you? So for the other panelists that we could maybe get to hear from.
So just to let you know, we have 8 minutes. So less than 8, 5 minutes actually.
It's been critical for me, absolutely critical. As a fairly newcomer to Toronto, I've only been here 6 years. Sometimes I didn't realize just how much I needed mentorship and just even sponsorship, somebody to say to somebody else, like, this person is really good at something, or, you know, brilliant at something, give them an opportunity. So mentorship and sponsorship has been necessary for my growth as an activist, but also just as a person living in Toronto.
Thank you, Jermaine.
For me, when I think about mentorship, I go back again to my local examples of folks who, by virtue of how they live their lives, virtue of how they navigated the world that they lived in, have inspired who I am and why I do what I do. Again, I'm going to call their names: Godfrey Seeley, Jeffrey Stanford. I'm going to call Brandy Rodriguez, Colin Robinson, sorry, not Johnson, Colin Robinson. Those folks who as activists have in one way, shape, or form influenced how I think about activism and how I perceive my way in the world, is because of them. And while they may not have had a structured mentorship relationship, I've learned from how they have conducted their lives. I've learned from Friends for Life, an organization, the only LGBTQ plus HIV organization in Trinidad and Tobago. I've learned from them. I've been guided by them as well, because the things that they did, living in a third world country with minimal resources. I just remember an example of us dressing up in kilts for a sports day parade that took place in the police barracks with many other very male-dominated sports groups. We were the only gay LGBTQ group there, and all our guys were in kilts. And our queen of the march of our section was the drag queen, and we won, and we were in the papers. And it's like, and little things like that push the needle, for me, are the things that provide that level of mentorship that I need. I must encourage the folks here who have also taught me in a one way, shape, or form that I've learned from. So I think that's the role that mentorship has played. And we have 30 seconds to go.
One more question, Kiro?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Activism is increasingly intersectional. Is HIV activism too isolated or removed from other social movements?
Repeat the question again, Jordan.
So activism is increasingly intersectional. Is HIV activism too isolated or removed from other social movements? I can throw it up in the text chat as well for folks.
Yeah. Alphonso?
I wouldn't say that it is too isolated. I mean, the thing about it is until you become HIV positive, honestly and truly, it doesn't mean anything other than it's a cause for someone else. But once you become HIV positive, then it's the number one thing that you want to stand up for. But the way we need to be looking at all of it, our rights, HIV, meds for everyone, PrEP, all of that stuff, is that this is a part of the entire spectrum of our lives. Somebody who's HIV positive, whether you are or not. So you should be standing up for them, just like they should be standing up for you to make sure that you have the right to be who you are. So if you're transgender, or if you're non-binary, or any of those things, these are all part of the spectrum of who we are. That's why we have a rainbow for our flag. So I don't think that it's isolating or that it's something just by itself, or it needs to be put over here. It's all part of the same thing, in my opinion, because we all have to stand up together.
I feel there's ways that we can improve that. Because people living in HIV are intersectional beings. And I'm saying that because I've encountered folks who are HIV positive, but they also have mental health issues. They have issues with substance use. And sometimes we treat them in this very silo approach. So we treat the HIV separate from the mental health, and we treat the mental health separately to how we treat their substance use. We don't recognize that we need to treat the intersectionality of people. What about people living with HIV who are homeless, who are living in shelters, who are dealing with all of these other conditions? So I feel that there are ways that we need to improve how we bring that talk of intersectionality into the work of intersectionality. And I feel that that's what's missing.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Alphonso. Jermaine, 1 minute.
I think I want to be a little controversial. If you're Black and gay, I feel like HIV activism is and has been way too intertwined with the Black gay activism. And I say this because for me, HIV is a syndemic issue in that you become HIV because of other social ills, right? And for me, those social ills aren't being dealt with enough, or I want to say enough, aren't being dealt with enough. And so more people are becoming HIV positive because nobody wants to treat the underlying issues of lack of community, lack of social support, and all these other issues that lead people to drugs and cause mental health issues. And, you end up having sex that leads to HIV. So yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your amazing responses. We weren't able to get to all the questions, but I do want to take the time to thank you, Alphonso, David, Jermaine, and Jordan for moderating, and for you for giving us all very insightful, powerful information on what it is that we need and the way of rethinking activism moving forward from now on. So I want to thank you all for being with us here today, and attendees, the GMSH. I'm sure a lot of us have Zoom fatigue at this point, and there's a lot of conferences going on at the same time. So to that, I want to say TGIF for some of us who are not working this weekend. But for those of you who are working this weekend, courage to you. And we are here to support you. So love to everyone. Have a good day.